They say a mother's womb is the first sanctuary. But for Eliza Thorne, it was her first prison. Born into privilege in 1852, she should have lived a life of silk gowns and afternoon tea. Instead, she lived on her knees scrubbing floors her four sisters dirtied, starving so her golden brother Julian could feast, and bleeding beneath a leather belt wielded by the one woman who should have protected her. Lady Martha Thorne didn't just neglect her eldest daughter, she weaponized her. Every gambling debt, every social humiliation, every drop of maternal rage found its target in Eliza's flesh. While the countryside whispered about the Thorne family's fading fortune, no one whispered about the girl who disappeared into the scullery each night, emerging each dawn with fresh bruises hidden beneath high collars and long sleeves. Eliza believed her story would end in silence, perhaps in the cold earth of an unmarked grave, or simply fading into nothingness like morning mist. She didn't know that beyond the iron gates of her torment, a pair of steel-grey eyes had been watching, a man who ruled the northern estates with absolute authority, a man who understood cruelty intimately because he had survived it himself, a man who never spoke a single word, yet whose presence could command an entire room to its knees. Benedict Sterling, the Duke of Northwood, didn't believe in mercy, but he believed in justice, with the fervor of a man who had once prayed for it himself. And when he witnessed what happened on that fog-drenched morning in the Thorne courtyard, something ancient and protective awakened in his chest. This is the story of how a silent duke broke every rule of society to save a girl the world had forgotten, and the shocking truth Eliza discovered when she finally learned why he had been searching for her family all along. Hello everyone. Before we go deeper into today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let us return to our main character. The Thorne estate sat like a rotting tooth in the mouth of the English countryside, still grand from a distance, but hollow and diseased upon closer inspection. The gardens that once rivaled those of minor royalty now grew wild with thorns and nettles. The fountain in the courtyard had run dry 3 summers ago, leaving only a basin of stagnant water where mosquitoes bred in clouds thick enough to choke on. Inside the manor, the decay was even more pronounced. Portraits of distinguished ancestors hung crooked on walls that hadn't seen fresh paint in a decade. The marble floors were dulled with neglect, and in the corners where shadows gathered thickest, one could sometimes spot the telltale droppings of rats who had grown bold in their dominion. But nowhere was the rot more evident than in the dining room each evening, where the Thorne family gathered around a table that told the story of their hierarchy more clearly than any family tree. At the head sat Lady Martha Thorne, a woman whose beauty had curdled into something hard and sharp. She wore jewelry that had been in the family for generations, heavy emerald earrings, a ruby brooch, gold rings on fingers that drummed impatiently against the table's edge. Her gowns were still fine, though growing threadbare at the seams, and she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone determined to maintain appearances even as everything crumbled around her. To her right sat Julian, the golden son. At 15, he was everything his mother had dreamed of, handsome, in a soft, pampered way, with carefully styled blonde hair and hands that had never known a day's labor. His waistcoat was new, purchased just last week with money the family didn't have, and he wore it with the careless arrogance of someone who had never been denied anything. The 4 sisters, Constance, Arabella, Louisa, and young Matilda, sat in descending order of age and favor. Each wore dresses of varying quality, with Constance in silk and Matilda in cotton, but all infinitely finer than what their eldest sister possessed. They giggled and gossiped, discussed potential suitors and the latest fashions from London, their voices creating a bubble of normalcy that deliberately excluded one person. Eliza stood in the corner by the servants' entrance, motionless as a piece of furniture. At 21, she should have been the first married, the most celebrated. Instead, she wore a dress of rough homespun cloth, stained with ash from the kitchen fires, and mending patches visible even in the candlelight. Her honey-colored hair, which could have been beautiful if properly cared for, was pulled back in a severe knot at the base of her skull. Her face, naturally fine-boned and delicate, was hollow with hunger, dark circles beneath eyes that had learned to look at nothing and no one directly. She had learned that lesson the hard way. Eye contact was interpreted as defiance. Defiance earned the belt. Tonight's meal was mutton stew, thick with vegetables from what remained of the kitchen garden. The scent alone made Eliza's stomach clench with hunger she hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. And even then, it had been only a heel of stale bread. But she remained still, hands clasped in front of her, waiting. "Julian, darling, have another serving," Lady Martha cooed, personally ladling more stew into her son's already overflowing bowl. "A young man needs his strength. You'll be managing the estate soon enough, and we can't have you wasting away." The irony of this statement, spoken in a house mortgaged 3 times over, managed by no one, seemed to escape everyone at the table. "Mother's right," Julian said, his mouth full. "I've been thinking about modernizing our approach, perhaps investing in railway stocks, or—" "With what capital, dear brother?" Constance interrupted sweetly. "Unless you plan to marry that wool merchant's daughter you've been courting." Julian's face flushed. "Eleanor Ashford is a perfectly respectable—" "She's common," Arabella interjected, reaching for the bread. "Her father may have money, but you can smell the sheep on her." "Girls, please," Martha said, though her tone lacked any real reprimand. "We are still a family of quality. We choose our associations carefully." Eliza's hands tightened imperceptibly. Carefully. That was rich. Martha's careful associations had led them to the card tables of every gambling den within 50 miles. The family's declining fortune wasn't due to bad investments or agricultural failure. It was due to Martha's addiction to faro, whist, and any other game where she could wager money they didn't have. When Arthur Thorne, Eliza's father, had still been in residence, he'd managed to keep his wife's habits somewhat contained. But Arthur was a merchant who dealt in textiles, and his business required long voyages to the continent. 6 months ago, he'd left for what should have been a 3-month trip to France and Italy. He was now 2 months overdue, and the letters had stopped coming. Without Arthur's stabilizing presence and regular income, Martha had become unrestrained in her vices, and when she lost, which was often, she needed someone to blame, someone to punish, someone who couldn't fight back. "Eliza," Martha's voice cut through the dinner conversation like a blade. "Why are you simply standing there like a simpleton? Clear Louisa's plate. She's finished." Eliza moved forward silently, reaching for the plate. Louisa, 16 and cruel in the thoughtless way of spoiled children, deliberately tipped her water goblet as Eliza approached. The liquid spread across the tablecloth and dripped onto Eliza's already stained dress. "Oh, how clumsy," Louisa said, her eyes glittering with malice. "Mother, she's wet the table." "I see that," Martha said coldly. "Eliza, you will scrub that cloth by hand tonight. I won't have our linens ruined by your incompetence." "Yes, Mother," Eliza whispered. The words tasted like ash. "And take only the scraps for yourself. After such carelessness, you hardly deserve even that." Eliza gathered the plates, moving around the table with the practiced invisibility of someone who had learned to become a ghost in her own home. In the kitchen, she scraped the remains into a wooden bowl, gristle too tough for the others to chew. Vegetables gone cold and congealed. Bread crusts so hard they would need to be soaked in water to be edible. This was her inheritance. This was her mother's love. She sat on the kitchen floor, in the one corner where the warmth from the dying cook fire still reached, and ate her scraps with her fingers. No one had given her a spoon. She hadn't had a spoon of her own for 3 years. As she chewed the tough meat, her mind wandered to forbidden territory she thought of escape. She imagined walking out the servant's door and simply continuing to walk until the manor disappeared behind the hills. But where would she go? She had no money, no connections, no references for employment. Her mother had made certain of that, turning away every potential suitor, every offer of work, every opportunity that might have given Eliza independence. No, Eliza was trapped as surely as if she were chained in the cellar. Her cage simply had more rooms. She didn't know that tomorrow morning would bring a visitor to the village market, a man in a black greatcoat, a man who never spoke, a man who had been searching for the Thorne family for longer than anyone knew. She didn't know that her life, her entire understanding of what was possible, was about to shatter and remake itself into something she couldn't yet imagine. For tonight, she was simply Eliza Thorne, the unwanted daughter, eating scraps on a kitchen floor while her family feasted one room away. Tomorrow, everything would change. The morning brought rain, the cold, persistent kind that soaked through wool and chilled bone. Eliza woke before dawn on her pallet in the tiny room off the kitchen, barely large enough to be called a closet. The space held only her thin mattress, a single threadbare blanket, and a wooden crate that served as both chair and storage for her 2 other dresses, each as worn as the one she currently owned. She dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness, her fingers fumbling with buttons in the cold. The house stirred around her. As servants arrived from the village, the Thornes could no longer afford live-in staff except for old Mrs. Beatrice, the cook, who was too ancient and loyal to be dismissed despite the fact that her wages went months unpaid. By the time the family rose for breakfast, Eliza had already scrubbed the front steps, emptied chamber pots, laid fires in 4 rooms, and begun the washing of yesterday's table linens. Her hands were raw and red from the lye soap, and her back ached from bending over the washboard. But she showed no sign of discomfort when her mother swept into the morning room. "Eliza, you look positively feral," Martha said, stirring sugar into her tea with a silver spoon that should have been sold months ago to pay creditors. "Stand up straight. We may be experiencing temporary financial difficulties, but we are still Thornes. We do not slouch." Eliza straightened her spine, though her muscles screamed in protest. "That's better. Now, we're expecting a visitor this afternoon. The Earl of Ravenswood will be calling at 3 o'clock. You will make yourself scarce, completely invisible. Do you understand? I will not have him seeing you in this state. The Earl of Ravenswood." Eliza's heart gave a strange flutter, not of hope exactly, but of curiosity. She'd heard the name whispered in the village. He was a widower in his 50s, wealthy, respectable, known for his kind treatment of tenants. Hardly the romantic figure a young woman might dream of. But at 21, Eliza's dreams had been beaten out of her long ago. Kindness and security would have been more than enough, but why would such a man be calling on the Thornes? She got her answer at 2:30, when Martha ordered her to put on her least offensive dress and actually brush her hair. "You'll serve the tea," Martha instructed, "but you will not speak unless directly addressed. You will keep your eyes downcast, and for heaven's sake, try not to look quite so starved. It reflects poorly on the family." How exactly Eliza was supposed to look well-fed when she received only scraps was unclear, but she nodded mutely. The Earl arrived precisely at 3, in a fine carriage drawn by matching bay horses. He was tall, silver-haired, with a weathered face that spoke of time spent outdoors rather than in drawing rooms. His clothes were expensive but conservative, and he moved with the careful dignity of someone aware of their own power but reluctant to wield it unnecessarily. Martha received him in the withdrawing room, the only space in the house still maintained to acceptable standards. Eliza stood by the tea service, trying to make herself invisible as instructed. "Lady Thorne, thank you for receiving me," the Earl said, settling into the chair Martha indicated. "I'll come straight to the point, as I'm not one for unnecessary pleasantries." "Directness is a virtue, my lord," Martha said, though her smile was tight. "I've come to inquire about your eldest daughter, Miss Eliza Thorne." The room seemed to contract. Eliza's hands froze on the teapot. "Eliza?" Martha's voice could have frozen fire. "Whatever for. I saw her in the village market last week. She was helping old Mrs. Patterson with her parcels. The woman's hands are twisted with arthritis, you understand. Your daughter's grace and kindness made an impression. I've been a widower for 5 years now, Lady Thorne, and I find myself desiring companionship. A wife who values compassion over vanity would suit me well." Eliza's heart hammered so violently she thought everyone must hear it. This was impossible. Men like the Earl didn't notice women like her, invisible, impoverished, broken, and yet he had. He'd seen her one moment of simple human kindness and thought. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding, Lord Ravenswood," Martha said smoothly, and Eliza's hope died as quickly as it had sparked. "My dear Eliza, how shall I put this delicately? She's not quite right in her faculties. I beg your pardon, simple-minded, my lord. She can perform basic tasks under supervision, but marriage? Impossible. She hasn't the intellect for managing a household, or the constitution for bearing children. My physician has confirmed it a weakness of the nerves and the mind. It's why we keep her close to home, you understand, for her own protection." Every word was a lie. Every single word. But delivered with such maternal concern, such gentle sadness, that anyone would believe it. The Earl's face shifted through several emotions: surprise, sympathy, embarrassment. "I had no idea. Please forgive my presumption, Lady Thorne. I certainly meant no offense to you or your daughter." "Of course not, my lord. You couldn't have known. We keep it quiet, naturally, for the family's dignity." "Naturally." The Earl stood, abandoning his untouched tea. "I should take my leave. Please give my regards to your husband when he returns." "I shall." Eliza stood frozen, still holding the teapot, as her one chance at escape walked out the door. The Earl didn't even glance at her, why would he? She was defective now. Damaged goods, an object of pity rather than interest. The moment his carriage disappeared down the drive, Martha's mask of gentility shattered. "You," she hissed, rounding on Eliza. "You dare to make yourself noticed. You dare to attract the attention of a peer while your sisters remain unmarried." "I didn't. I wasn't trying to." The slap came so fast Eliza didn't see it coming. Her head snapped to the side, and she tasted blood where her teeth cut her inner cheek. "Constance should have been married last season, but we couldn't afford a proper debut because of your father's failing business. And now you, of all people, think you can steal opportunities that belong to your betters. Mother, please, get out of my sight. Go to the village and tell Mr. Henderson at the lending office that I need to see him tomorrow. We're going to arrange a proper season for Constance. Even if I have to mortgage this house to the rafters." But the house was already mortgaged, and remortgaged, and mortgaged again. There was nothing left to borrow against except... Eliza fled before her mother could articulate whatever new horror she was planning. She grabbed her worn shawl and walked the 3 miles to the village in the rain, her face throbbing, her dress soaked through, her mind numb with the familiar pain of hopes raised and crushed in the same hour. She didn't know that the Earl, troubled by something he couldn't quite name in Lady Thorne's too smooth explanation, had mentioned the incident to a friend at his club that evening. She didn't know that this friend had connections to the northern estates. She didn't know that by week's end, a letter would arrive at a fortress-like manor in Northwood, addressed to a duke who never spoke, but who had been waiting for any whisper of the Thorne family name for 3 long years. All Eliza knew was that her mother had just sold her future to secure her sister's present, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop it. 3 days after the Earl's visit, Arthur Thorne came home. It was late afternoon, and Eliza was in the scullery scrubbing pots when she heard the commotion. A carriage, not the family's shabby vehicle, but something hired from the village rattling up the drive. Footsteps on the gravel. Then her father's voice, booming through the halls with a vitality she'd almost forgotten he possessed. "Martha, children, I've returned." Eliza's hands stilled in the washing water. "Papa." Her heart clenched with a complicated mixture of emotions. Arthur Thorne loved his children, all his children, including Eliza, but he loved them from a distance, through the soft filter of occasional visits and expensive gifts. He was kind but absent, affectionate but oblivious. He'd never fully understood what happened to Eliza in the spaces between his departures and returns. But Martha had grown careless lately, confident. The beating from yesterday had been particularly savage punishment for some imagined slight. Eliza couldn't even remember, and she'd done nothing to hide the marks. Why would she? Who was going to see them? The servants knew better than to speak. The siblings didn't care, and Arthur wasn't supposed to be home for another month. Eliza heard her sister's delighted squeals, Julian's more measured greeting, and Martha's surprised. "Arthur, darling, we didn't expect you for weeks yet. Concluded my business early." Arthur's voice carried down the hall, warm with the pleasure of homecoming. "Couldn't wait to see my family. Where's Eliza?" A pause. Eliza could imagine her mother's calculation, weighing options. "In the kitchen, dear. You know how she loves to help Mrs. Beatrice. I'll go greet her then." Arthur, wait, but his footsteps were already approaching. Eliza stood quickly, wiping her hands on her apron, trying to arrange her face into something approaching normal. But there was no hiding the livid bruise across her cheekbone, the split lip barely healed, the way she held her left arm carefully against her ribs where the belt's buckle had caught her hardest. Arthur Thorne stopped in the scullery doorway. He was a large man, not tall but broad-shouldered and barrel-chested from years of physical labor before his merchant business had taken off. His face was deeply tanned from the continent's sun. His brown beard shot through with grey. He looked at his eldest daughter, and Eliza watched the color drain from his face. "Eliza." His voice was strangled. "What in God's name?" "I fell, Papa," she said quickly, the lie automatic. The stairs were slippery, and Don't. The word cracked like a whip. Arthur moved closer, his hands hovering near her face but not quite touching, as if afraid he'd hurt her further. His eyes traced every visible injury, and she saw the exact moment he understood these weren't from a fall. The exact moment he realized. "How long?" he asked quietly. Eliza couldn't answer. Her throat had closed. "How long, Eliza?" "Since you've been gone," she whispered. "But Papa, it's—" "Show me." When she didn't move, he said it again, firmer. "Show me your arms, your back." With shaking hands, Eliza rolled up her sleeve. The bruises there formed a map of violence, some fresh and purple-black, others fading to yellow-green. Distinct parallel marks showed where the belt's leather had struck repeatedly. Arthur Thorne's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He turned on his heel and strode from the scullery with such purpose that Eliza's stomach dropped. She hurried after him, terrified of what was coming. He found Martha in the drawing room, calmly pouring tea for the children as if nothing were amiss. "Arthur, there you are," she began. "I was just telling the children about your trip. Where is it?" Martha's hand paused over the sugar bowl. "Where is what, dear?" "The belt. The one you used on our daughter. Where is it?" The room went silent. Constance and Arabella exchanged glances. Julian shifted uncomfortably. Little Matilda looked confused. "Arthur, I don't know what Eliza has told you, but—" "She told me nothing. I have eyes, Martha. Where is it?" For a long moment, Martha considered lying. Eliza could see the calculation in her eyes. But Arthur's expression, cold and implacable, must have convinced her it would be futile. "In our chambers. Third drawer of my wardrobe." Arthur climbed the stairs, 2 at a time. When he returned, he held a thick leather belt, worn smooth from use, the buckle heavy and brass. He looked at it with such disgust that Eliza thought he might be sick. "Did you know," he said conversationally, though his voice shook with rage, "that in France they've begun writing treatises on the rights of children, the responsibility of parents to nurture rather than brutalize?" "How progressive," Martha said icily. "But we're not in France. We're in England, where discipline is a mother's prerogative." "Discipline," Arthur's voice rose. "This isn't discipline, Martha. This is torture. This is cruelty. This is everything our faith and our laws forbid." He strode to the fireplace, where the afternoon fire still burned low. Before Martha could move, he threw the belt into the flames. "Arthur, no. That's my—" "Your what?" "Your right," he whirled on her. "You have no right to treat any child this way, let alone our own daughter." They all watched as the leather curled and blackened, the buckle glowing red with heat. The smell of burning leather filled the room, acrid and bitter. "How dare you?" Martha breathed. How dare you undermine my authority in front of the children? I dare because I'm their father, and because I've been a coward and a fool. I knew you favored the others. I told myself it was harmless, that Eliza was strong enough to bear it, but I didn't know. His voice cracked. I didn't know you'd gone this far. He turned to Eliza, who stood frozen in the doorway. Pack your things. You're coming with me to town. I'll arrange for you to stay with my sister in Yorkshire until I can. You'll do no such thing, Martha interrupted, her voice sharp as a blade. Eliza remains here. She has responsibilities. Her responsibility is to heal and to be safe, neither of which she can do under this roof. If you remove her from my household, Arthur, I'll make certain everyone knows why. The Earl of Ravenswood has already expressed interest in Constance. Shall I tell him that her father has publicly accused his wife of abuse? That the family is so fractured we can't keep our dirty secrets hidden? It was a masterful strike. Arthur's business depended on his reputation. Scandal would destroy contracts, partnerships, everything he'd built. And Martha knew it. You wouldn't dare, he said. But there was uncertainty in his voice now. Test me. The silence stretched. Eliza watched her father wage an internal war love for his daughter against protection of his livelihood and his other children. She knew which would win. It always did. Fine, Arthur said finally, defeated. She stays. But this ends, Martha. No more beatings. No more cruelty. Or I swear before God, I'll take all the children and leave you to rot in this mausoleum with nothing but your precious reputation to keep you warm. How very dramatic, Martha said coolly. I suppose we have an understanding then. That night, Arthur came to Eliza's tiny room off the kitchen. He sat on the floor beside her pallet, too large for the small space, and he wept. Great, shuddering sobs that shook his shoulders. I'm sorry, he kept saying. I'm so sorry, little one. I should have known. I should have protected you. Eliza held his hand and said nothing. What was there to say? He would leave again soon, his business demanded it. And when he did, Martha would remember this humiliation. She would remember her burnt belt and her threatened authority, and she would make Eliza pay for every single moment of it. For now, though, Eliza had her father's hand in hers, and the warmth of the kitchen fire creeping under her door. She closed her eyes and pretended, just for tonight, that this protection might last. But even as she drifted towards sleep, she heard it. Her mother's voice drifting down from the upper floors, speaking to one of the servants. Send word to the village carpenter. Tell him I need a switch cut from the willow tree. The thin branches, the ones that sing when they move through the air. A switch was quieter than a belt. Faster. Left marks that faded more quickly. And far, far more painful. Eliza bit her lip to keep from crying, and squeezed her father's hand one more time before he left her to the darkness. Arthur Thorne stayed home for 2 weeks. It was the longest stretch Eliza could remember in years, and for those 14 days, the house existed in an uneasy truce. Martha played the devoted wife with consummate skill. She fussed over Arthur's meals, inquired after his business, entertained him with stories about the children's small accomplishments. She was charming at breakfast, solicitous at dinner, and affectionate in the evenings when the family gathered in the withdrawing room. To any observer, she was the picture of marital devotion, and she didn't touch Eliza once. Not because her rage had cooled. Eliza could feel it simmering beneath her mother's perfect facade, hot as forge coals, but because Arthur was watching. He'd made a point of including Eliza in family activities, insisting she join them for meals, complimenting her needlework, asking her opinion on small matters. It was more attention than he'd paid her in years. And though Eliza appreciated the gesture, it filled her with dread. Every kindness he showed her would be repaid in pain once he left. Martha was keeping a ledger in her mind, tallying every slight, every moment her authority had been undermined. The willow switch had arrived 3 days after Arthur's return. Eliza had watched from the kitchen window as the carpenter delivered it, thin, flexible branches, stripped of leaves, and bound together with twine. Martha had received it with a smile and a few coins, then locked it in her chamber. She hadn't mentioned it, didn't need to. The message was clear. This is waiting for you. On the 13th day of Arthur's stay, the letter arrived. Eliza was mending linens when she heard her father's exclamation from his study. Moments later, he emerged, looking stricken. "There's been an issue with the shipment in Marseille," he announced at dinner that evening. "Pirates or customs troubles, the message wasn't clear. I have to leave immediately to sort it out, or we'll lose the entire investment." Martha's face remained sympathetic, but Eliza saw the flash of victory in her eyes. "Of course, darling. Business must come first. When do you leave?" "Tomorrow morning, first light. I'll take the mail coach to Southampton and catch a packet ship from there. If all goes well, I'll be back in 6 weeks. 2 months at most." 6 weeks. Eliza's hands clenched in her lap. 2 months. An eternity. That night, Arthur came to her room again. He sat on the edge of her pallet, looking older than his 48 years in the dim candlelight. "I've spoken to your mother," he said quietly, reminded her of my expectations. "She's given me her word that you'll be treated fairly in my absence." They both knew what Martha's word was worth. "I've also instructed Mr. Henderson at the lending office to give you an emergency fund. £10, kept in your name. If things become unbearable, you're to go to him. He'll arrange transport to my sister's house in Yorkshire." "Papa, I couldn't." "Yes, you could. You can and you will if necessary. Promise me, Eliza." She promised, though they both understood she wouldn't. Running away would bring scandal down on the entire family. Her sisters would suffer for it, their marriage prospects destroyed. Even Julian would be tainted, and Arthur's business would collapse under the weight of social ostracism. No, she was trapped. They both knew it. Arthur kissed her forehead, the first such gesture she could remember in years, and left her to the darkness. He departed at dawn in a hired carriage, the morning mist still thick on the ground. The family gathered in the courtyard to see him off. Julian shook his hand. The girls kissed his cheeks. Martha embraced him with every appearance of wifely devotion. Eliza stood slightly apart, memorizing her father's face. Something cold had settled in her chest, a premonition she couldn't name. She watched the carriage disappear down the drive until it was swallowed by the fog, and the sound of hooves on gravel faded to nothing. When she turned back toward the house, Martha was watching her. The mask had already slipped. Gone was the devoted wife. In her place stood something harder, colder, ancient, and implacable as stone. "Inside," Martha said quietly. "All of you." They filed into the house. The moment the door closed behind them, Martha's entire demeanor shifted. She moved through the hall with quick, purposeful strides, her silk skirts rustling like warning bells. "Constance, Arabella, Louisa, go to the withdrawing room and practice your embroidery. I'll review your work in 2 hours. Matilda, to the nursery with your governess. Julian, I need you to ride to town and speak to Mr. Henderson about that loan. We'll be having guests next month, and I need to know our exact standing." The children scattered like birds before a storm. Only Eliza remained, standing in the hall. Martha turned to her slowly. A smile played at her lips, not warm, not kind, but satisfied. The expression of someone about to enjoy a long-anticipated meal. "Follow me." They climbed the stairs to Martha's chambers. The room was lavish, even in the house's decay. Thick carpets, heavy velvet curtains, a 4-poster bed that had belonged to Martha's grandmother. On the dressing table sat crystal perfume bottles and jewelry boxes lined with satin. Martha went to her wardrobe and withdrew the willow switch. It was perhaps 4 feet long, the bundled branches no thicker than Eliza's smallest finger. Martha gave it an experimental swish through the air. It made a high, whistling sound like wind through winter reeds, or the last breath of something dying. "Do you know why I prefer willow over leather?" Martha asked conversationally. Eliza said nothing. There was no right answer. Leather leaves such obvious marks. Neighbors notice, servants gossip. But willow. She swished it again. "Willow stings like fire. The pain is exquisite, but the marks fade within days, perfect for maintaining discipline without inviting unwanted scrutiny." She circled Eliza slowly, like a predator assessing prey. "Your father's little performance was quite touching, wasn't it? burning my belt, threatening to take you away. As if he has any real power in this house. Martha laughed, a brittle, horrible sound. He's gone now. Back to his ships and his ledgers. And you and I both know he won't be back in 6 weeks. Last year's 2-month trip took 5. The year before, 7. Something always comes up. Some emergency that requires his personal attention. She was right. Eliza's chest constricted, which means you're mine again. My property to do with as I please. And Eliza? Martha leaned close, her breath hot against Eliza's ear. I please to remind you exactly where you stand in this family. The first strike came without further warning. The switch caught Eliza across the shoulders, and white-hot pain exploded through her body. It was nothing like the belt. This was sharper, more focused. Like being branded with a thin line of fire. She bit her lip to keep from crying out. Making noise only made it worse. Making noise made Martha creative. For 14 days, I've had to watch you sit at my table like an equal, Martha hissed. Strike. I've had to endure your father treating you like a treasured daughter. Strike. I've had to smile while he undermined every ounce of authority I've built in this household. Strike, strike, strike. Eliza's knees gave out. She collapsed to the carpet, trying to curl into herself, to protect the most vulnerable parts. But Martha was practiced. The switch found every exposed piece of skin, shoulders, arms, the backs of her hands when she tried to shield herself. You will never strike, be anything. Strike, but my servant, strike. Do you understand me? Yes, Mother, Eliza gasped. You exist because I allow it. You eat because I permit it. And if you ever inspire your father to such theatrics again, I will make you wish you'd never been born. The beating continued until Martha's arm grew tired. When she finally stopped, Eliza lay crumpled on the floor, her body a constellation of burning welts. Every breath hurt, every tiny movement sent fresh waves of agony through her. Martha returned the switch to the wardrobe and smoothed her skirts. When she spoke again, her voice was calm, almost pleasant. Clean yourself up. I expect the silver polished by dinner. And Eliza, she paused at the door. Welcome home. Eliza lay on the carpet for a long time after her mother left, too hurt to move, too exhausted to cry. Through the window, she could see the sky beginning to darken. Somewhere far away, her father was boarding a ship, confident that he'd protected her. He had no idea he'd just sentenced her to months of torture. And she had no idea that 300 miles north, in a fortress of grey stone, a silent duke was reading a letter that mentioned the Thorne family name, or that he'd been searching for them for 3 long years, or that he'd already begun making preparations for a journey south. Eliza knew none of this. She knew only pain, and the cold certainty that this was her life. This was all she would ever have. She was wrong, but it would be weeks before she discovered just how wrong she was. 6 weeks had passed since Arthur's departure, and Eliza had learned to navigate her new reality with the grim expertise of the chronically abused. She'd learned, for instance, that Martha preferred to deliver punishment in the morning it gave Eliza all day to work through the pain and still complete her chores. She'd learned that the switch hurt worst across the palms and the backs of the knees. She'd learned to arrange her face into perfect blankness, because showing pain only encouraged Martha to strike harder. Most importantly, she'd learned that hope was dangerous. Each time she'd allowed herself to believe things might improve, each time a letter arrived from her father, each time Martha seemed distracted by her own affairs, hope had been crushed so thoroughly that Eliza had finally stopped reaching for it. It was better this way. Better to be numb than constantly disappointed. On a grey October morning, Martha summoned Eliza to the drawing room. Her mother stood by the window, dressed in a gown of deep burgundy that had seen better days, though it was still finer than anything Eliza owned. "We have a situation," Martha announced without preamble. "Mr. Henderson has demanded partial payment on our outstanding debts by week's end, £5 immediately, or he threatens to begin foreclosure proceedings." £5. It might as well have been 500. The household had barely enough for food. "I need you to go to your room and retrieve your father's pocket watch. The gold one he gave you for your 16th birthday. It's worth at least £7. Eliza's stomach dropped. The watch was the only thing she owned of any value, the only gift her father had ever given her personally. Inside the case, he'd had engraved, "To my Eliza, who has her mother's beauty and her father's heart." Mother, please, don't make me repeat myself. 30 minutes later, Eliza stood in the village market square, the watch heavy in her pocket, trying to muster the courage to enter Mr. Palmer's pawn shop. The market bustled around her farmers selling autumn vegetables, women purchasing cloth, children weaving between carts, the sounds of normal life. Of people whose mothers didn't beat them, whose existence wasn't measured in degrees of pain. She was so focused on her internal misery that she didn't notice the man approaching until he was directly in front of her. He was perhaps 40, with a florid face and the well-fed appearance of minor prosperity. His clothes were expensive but slightly too tight, suggesting a man who ate well and often. His eyes, when they fixed on Eliza, held the predatory gleam of someone who'd spotted weakness. "Miss Thorne, isn't it?" he said, his voice oily with false friendliness. Eliza's hands tightened on the watch. She recognized him now, Mr. Grimsby, one of the creditors her mother owed money to. He ran a gambling house in the next county and had been pursuing payment for months. "Mr. Grimsby," she acknowledged quietly, trying to step around him. He moved to block her path. "I hear your mother's sending you to pawn the family treasures. Fallen on hard times, have we?" "Excuse me, sir. I need to—" "I could make things very simple for you." He smiled, revealing yellowed teeth. "Your mother owes me £12. That little watch in your pocket won't even make a dent. But I'm a reasonable man. I'd be willing to forgive the entire debt for alternative payment." His meaning was sickeningly clear. His eyes traveled over her body with the assessment of someone appraising livestock. Eliza's face burned with humiliation. "I'm not interested in your offer, Mr. Grimsby. Not interested?" His smile vanished. "You think you're in a position to refuse? Your family's one missed payment from debtor's prison." "Your mother certainly can't make good," she added. "Another £8 to her debt just last Tuesday at my tables. And your father?" He laughed cruelly. "Word is his ship's been delayed again. Probably ran aground somewhere and he's too ashamed to send word. You're alone, Miss Thorne. You have no choices left." He grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "So let's discuss this somewhere private, shall we?" The lady said no. The voice came from behind Grimsby, deep, measured, and absolutely cold. Grimsby spun around, and Eliza looked up to see who had spoken. The man was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed to span half the market square. He wore a black greatcoat of exquisite quality, well tailored to his powerful frame. Dark hair, slightly too long, fell around a face that was all sharp angles and hard edges, but it was his eyes that struck Eliza silent pale grey, like winter ice, holding an intensity that made her breath catch. Those eyes fixed on Grimsby with such absolute contempt that the creditor actually flinched. "This doesn't concern you," Grimsby blustered, though his grip on Eliza's wrist had loosened. The stranger didn't speak. He simply looked at Grimsby's hand on Eliza's arm, then back at Grimsby's face. The message was clear. "Remove your hand, or I will remove it for you." Grimsby released her immediately, taking 2 steps back. "Fine. Keep your precious dignity, Miss Thorne. But when your mother's in debtor's prison and your sisters are working in the mills, remember you had a choice." He vanished into the crowd, leaving Eliza alone with her unlikely rescuer. She looked up at him properly now. He was perhaps 30, though something in his bearing suggested he'd seen more than his years should hold. His face was aristocratic, high cheekbones, straight nose, a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled. There was a scar just visible at his temple, disappearing into his hairline. But it was his eyes that held her. They were studying her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. "Thank you," she managed. "I thank you." He inclined his head in acknowledgement but didn't speak. She waited for him to say something, to introduce himself, but he remained silent. After an awkward moment, Eliza realized he wasn't going to speak. Perhaps he was mute, Or perhaps he simply didn't feel the need to fill silence with meaningless words. "I should go," she said. "I have business to attend to." She moved past him toward the pawn shop, but she felt his eyes on her back the entire way. When she glanced over her shoulder, he was still watching her with that same intense focus, as if memorizing every detail. Inside the pawn shop, Mr. Palmer offered her £5 for the watch, £2 less than its worth, but she had no leverage to negotiate. She took the money with numb fingers and stepped back into the market square. The stranger in the black coat was gone. Eliza told herself it didn't matter. He was just a traveler passing through, probably already forgotten about the brief encounter. She walked home slowly, the coins heavy in her pocket, her wrist still aching where Grimsby had grabbed her. She didn't know that the stranger hadn't left the village. He'd simply moved to a less conspicuous position, watching as she trudged toward the Thorne estate. He watched until she disappeared through the gates, then stood for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he turned and walked to the coaching inn where he'd left his horse. The stable boy who'd been tending the massive black stallion eyed him nervously. "Will you be staying longer, my lord?" the boy asked. The stranger, Benedict Sterling, Duke of Northwood, shook his head. He withdrew a piece of paper from his coat and wrote in quick, decisive strokes. "Prepare for a longer journey. We'll be staying in the area for some time." He signed it with his ducal seal, a northern eagle with wings spread, and handed it to the boy along with a gold sovereign. The boy's eyes widened. "My lord, this is too much." Benedict raised a hand to stop him, then wrote again, "Discretion is valuable." "Of course, my lord." Not a word to anyone. Benedict nodded and turned his gaze back toward the road leading to the Thorne estate. He'd been searching for this family for 3 years, ever since he'd made a promise to a dying man on a ship in the Mediterranean. A merchant named Arthur Thorne, who'd saved Benedict's life during a storm and extracted a single vow in return. "If anything happens to me, find my family, find my Eliza, make sure she's safe." Benedict had arrived too late to prevent Arthur's death. The delayed ship was actually a shipwreck that had taken Arthur's life 6 weeks ago, though no word had reached England yet. But he wasn't too late to keep his promise. And what he'd seen in the market today, a young woman with hollow cheeks and hopeless eyes, wearing a dress that had been mended so many times the original fabric was barely visible, clutching a treasured possession she was being forced to sell, told him everything he needed to know. Eliza Thorne was not safe. Not safe at all. He would need to learn more. Watch more carefully. Understand the full situation before he acted. Benedict had learned patience in his years of silence, had learned that the right action at the right time was worth more than 1,000 hasty interventions. But he had also learned to recognize abuse. He'd lived through it himself, at the hands of a father who believed pain was pedagogy. He knew the signs, the careful way Eliza held her left arm, as if guarding an injury, the flinch when Grimsby grabbed her wrist, the absolute absence of hope in her eyes. Someone was hurting her. Systematically, repeatedly, and Benedict Sterling did not tolerate such things. He mounted his horse and rode toward the Thorne estate, keeping to the concealment of the tree line. He would watch. He would wait, and when he understood exactly what was happening behind those walls, he would act. He had made a promise to a dying friend. He had made a vow, and Benedict Sterling never, ever broke his word. We're halfway through Eliza's journey, and it's about to take a shocking turn. You know, stories like these take hours to research and write, yet many of you watch and leave without subscribing. It only takes a second to hit that button. But for a creator, it's the fuel that keeps us going. If you've ever felt for someone like Eliza, don't let her story go unheard. Subscribe now and show that you care about the content we build for you. Don't be the one who just watches. Be the one who supports. Now, back to Benedict's silent gaze. Benedict watched the Thorne estate for 3 days. He'd taken rooms at the village inn under an assumed name, Mr. Sterling, a merchant surveying properties for potential investment. His silence was explained away as a throat ailment, and the innkeeper's wife clucked sympathetically while bringing him endless cups of tea with honey. From his observations, he quickly pieced together the household dynamics. The mother, Lady Martha Thorne, left the house each afternoon, always impeccably dressed despite the family's obvious financial troubles. She traveled to neighboring estates, presumably for social calls. Though Benedict's discreet inquiries revealed these visits often involved card games with substantial stakes. The woman was a compulsive gambler, bleeding the family fortune one hand of whist at a time. The son, Julian, was a wastrel of the first order. He spent his mornings sleeping off the previous night's drinking, his afternoons in the village tavern, and his evenings gambling away money the family didn't have. He was his mother's son in the worst possible way. The 4 daughters presented an interesting hierarchy. The eldest, Constance, carried herself with the entitled bearing of someone who expected the world to cater to her wishes. The younger 3 followed her lead with varying degrees of enthusiasm, from Arabella's calculated mimicry to little Matilda's uncertain participation. And then there was Eliza. Benedict watched her through his spyglass from the concealment of the woods. She rose before dawn each morning, emerging from a door at the back of the house, the servants' entrance. He realized with growing anger. She hauled water, scrubbed steps, emptied chamber pots. She worked without pause until well after dark, and even then, he sometimes saw a candle burning in what he'd identified as the scullery, suggesting she continued working long into the night. She ate separately from the family. On the one occasion he witnessed a family meal through an uncurtained window, Eliza stood in the corner like a piece of furniture, serving the others. She was given nothing, but it was the 4th day that confirmed his worst suspicions. He'd positioned himself near the garden wall, where a gap in the ivy allowed a view into the courtyard. It was mid-morning, and Eliza was carrying a heavy basket of wet laundry toward the washing line. She moved carefully, he noticed, with the controlled movements of someone in pain. She'd just hung the first sheet when Martha emerged from the house. "Eliza," the older woman called, her voice sharp. Eliza turned immediately, her body language shifting into something hunched and defensive. Martha approached, carrying something thin and flexible. Even from a distance, Benedict recognized it, a willow switch. He'd felt such implements himself, years ago, before his father's final beating had damaged his vocal cords so severely that speech became impossible. "Mrs. Beatrice informs me you burned the morning porridge," Martha said, her voice carrying across the courtyard. "I'm sorry, Mother. The fire was too hot. And excuses." Martha's face twisted with disgust. "Hold out your hands." Eliza's face went white. But she obeyed, extending both hands palm up. Martha struck 3 times in quick succession. The switch made a horrible whistling sound as it cut through the air. Eliza's face contorted with pain, but she didn't make a sound. Didn't cry out. Had she learned that making noise only made it worse? "Now finish the washing. And if I find any more incompetence today, we'll have another conversation. A longer one." Martha returned to the house, leaving Eliza standing in the courtyard, cradling her injured hands against her chest. Only when her mother was completely out of sight did Eliza allow herself to bend at the waist, a silent gasp of pain escaping her. Benedict's hands clenched on the wall so hard, the stone bit into his palms. The rational part of his mind reminded him that he couldn't simply storm in and rescue her. English law gave parents nearly absolute authority over their children, and Eliza was technically still under her mother's guardianship. Interfering could result in legal complications that would ultimately harm Eliza more than help her. But there was another way. A way that would give him legal authority to protect her while simultaneously ensuring Martha could never touch her again. He would need to be careful, calculating, but he'd learned patience and strategy during his years of silence. He knew how to plan, how to maneuver, how to achieve his goals without making a sound. That evening, Benedict rode openly to the Thorne estate and presented his card at the door. The butler, an elderly man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, showed him to the drawing room where Martha sat with her children. Martha's eyes lit with interest when she read the card. Benedict Sterling, Duke of Northwood. A duke was exactly the sort of connection she'd been seeking. "Your Grace, what an unexpected honor," she gushed, rising to curtsy. "To what do we owe this pleasure?" Benedict handed her a prepared note. "I'm in the area surveying properties. I understand you have financial difficulties. I may have a proposal that could benefit us both." Martha's mask of gentility didn't quite hide her eager calculation. Perhaps we should speak privately, he nodded. She dismissed the children and led him to Arthur's study, a room that still smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and leather. Once the door closed, Martha's practiced smile took on a sharper edge. "I'll be frank, Your Grace. We do have some temporary financial difficulties, but I assure you they're quite manageable." Benedict raised a hand to stop her and withdrew a leather portfolio from his coat. Inside were documents, lots of them. He spread them across the desk with methodical precision. Martha's face went progressively paler as she recognized them. IOUs from gambling houses, loan agreements from moneylenders, mortgages on the estate, signed in her own hand, unpaid bills from merchants across 3 counties. "How did you—" she began, then stopped, understanding dawning. "You've been investigating us." Benedict nodded once. He wrote quickly. "Your debts total £3,847. The estate is mortgaged beyond its value. Without intervention, you'll face debtor's prison within 3 months." "That's impossible." "My husband," he slid another paper across the desk. It was a death certificate, recently acquired through his network of contacts. "Arthur Thorne, drowned at sea 6 weeks ago." The paperwork had been delayed, but the facts were irrefutable. Martha sank into the desk chair, her face ashen. "Arthur is dead?" Benedict gave her a moment to process, then wrote again. "I can clear every debt, all of them, give you enough to live comfortably for years." Hope flickered in Martha's eyes. "What do you want in return?" Here was the crucial moment. Benedict wrote carefully, knowing every word mattered. "You have 6 children. I have need of a ward, someone to manage certain household duties in my northern estates. I'll purchase guardianship of one of your daughters. Full legal transfer. She'll want for nothing, and your debts will be cleared completely." "Which daughter?" Martha asked immediately, not outraged, not protective, but calculating which child she could most easily spare. Benedict wrote a single name, Eliza. Martha actually laughed. "Eliza? You want Eliza?" He nodded. "Your Grace, I fear you've been misinformed. Eliza is. She's not quite right in her faculties. Simple-minded, sickly. She'd be useless for any real work, now." Constance, on the other hand, Benedict interrupted with a sharp gesture and wrote rapidly. "I know exactly what she is. I've observed your household for days. I know she does all the labor while the others do nothing. I know you beat her. I know she's the most capable person in this house. And I know you see her as a burden you'd be happy to be rid of." Martha's face flushed with anger and embarrassment at being so thoroughly seen through. "That's absurd. I'm her mother." He slid another paper across the desk. It was a guardianship transfer document, already prepared by his solicitors. Beside it, he placed a bank draft for £4,000, more than enough to cover every debt with money left over. "Sign or don't," he wrote. "But this offer expires when I leave this room, and I suspect the moneylenders won't be as generous when they come to collect." Martha stared at the bank draft. £4,000. Freedom from every creditor, every threat of debtor's prison, enough to give her other children proper seasons, proper matches, and all she had to do was sign away the daughter she'd never wanted in the first place. "If I sign, she goes with you immediately?" Martha asked. Benedict nodded. "And I'll never see her again?" Another nod. Martha picked up the quill, dipped it in ink, and signed her name without hesitation. No questions about Eliza's future. No maternal concern. No second thoughts. She signed away her daughter like she was selling a piece of furniture. Benedict witnessed the signature and blotted the ink. He handed Martha the bank draft and gathered the signed documents. "When do you want her?" Martha asked, already counting the money in her mind. Benedict wrote, "Now, now." "But her things?" "What things?" He raised an eyebrow. "Does she own anything of value?" Martha had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "I suppose not." "Very well. I'll have her brought in." "That won't be necessary," Benedict wrote. "I know where to find her." He left Martha in the study, still clutching her bank draft, and made his way through the house toward the scullery. He found Eliza exactly where he expected, on her knees, scrubbing the floor with raw, reddened hands. The welts from this morning's beating were visible on her palms. She looked up when his shadow fell across her, and her face registered first confusion, then recognition. This was the man from the market, the one who'd rescued her from Grimsby. Benedict extended his hand to her. She stared at it, uncomprehending. He wrote quickly in his notebook, "Your mother has signed over your guardianship to me. You're leaving this house." Now, Eliza's eyes widened. "I don't understand. Guardianship? But I'm 21. English law says unmarried women remain under parental authority until marriage or age 25, he wrote. Your mother has transferred that authority to me. You belong to me now, legally. You bought me? The words came out flat, resigned. Of course someone had bought her. Why wouldn't they? She was property after all, always had been. Benedict saw the hopelessness in her eyes and wanted to explain that he wasn't like the others, that he meant to protect her, not harm her. But how could he make her understand with just written words? She had no reason to trust him. So instead, he simply wrote, "Come with me, please." Something in that please, the fact that he was asking rather than commanding, made Eliza rise on shaking legs. She had nothing to pack, nothing to take with her. Everything she owned was on her body or in her tiny room, 2 spare dresses as worn as the one she wore, a comb missing half its teeth, a single pair of stockings with more darn than original fabric. "May I?" she began hesitantly. "May I get my other clothes?" Benedict nodded and followed her to her tiny room. He saw her survey the pathetic collection of possessions, and something shifted in his chest. This was everything she owned in the world. This was what her family had left her with. He watched as she gathered her things into a small bundle, moving mechanically, as if this were happening to someone else. When she finished, she stood in the doorway of her prison and looked back one last time. "I should say goodbye," she whispered. Benedict shook his head firmly and offered his arm. She stared at it. When was the last time anyone had offered her such courtesy? Then hesitantly placed her hand on his sleeve. They walked through the house together. In the drawing room, her siblings looked up with varying expressions of surprise and indifference. Martha appeared in the doorway of the study, the bank draft already tucked into her bodice. "Goodbye, Eliza," Martha said with false warmth. "I'm sure you'll be very happy in your new situation." Eliza said nothing. What was there to say? Benedict led her outside to where his horse waited, a massive black stallion that stood at least 17 hands high. He mounted first, then reached down to pull Eliza up behind him. She had to hitch her skirts in a most unladylike manner to sit astride, but he'd positioned her so she could grip his coat for balance as they rode away from the estate. Eliza looked back once. She saw her mother already turning away, counting her payment. Saw her siblings returning to their comfortable lives, probably already forgetting she'd ever existed. She thought she should feel sad, or angry, or something, but she felt nothing at all. The numbness was complete. She didn't know that the man whose coat she clung to had spent years searching for her family. Didn't know that her father had saved his life and made him promise to protect his children. Didn't know that Benedict had been keeping watch over the Thorne estate for days, documenting every abuse, every cruelty, preparing his case. All she knew was that she'd been sold again, first to labor, now to this silent stranger. She supposed it didn't matter. One cage was much like another, but as they rode north through the autumn countryside, the warmth of Benedict's body blocking the cold wind, Eliza found herself thinking that perhaps this cage would at least be different. Perhaps different might be enough. The journey to Northwood took 4 days. They traveled in silence, Benedict because he couldn't speak, Eliza because she didn't know what to say. He'd arranged for a closed carriage once they reached the next town, sparing her the impropriety of riding astride for the entire journey. Inside the carriage, they sat opposite each other, and Eliza found herself studying the man who'd purchased her. He was handsome in a harsh, uncompromising way, all sharp angles and controlled power. His face gave away nothing, but his eyes occasionally flicked to her with an intensity that should have been frightening but somehow wasn't. When they stopped at coaching inns, he secured separate rooms without hesitation, always ensuring she had the better accommodation. He ordered meals for her without asking what she wanted, but the food was always simple and nourishing, nothing fancy that might upset a stomach accustomed to near starvation. He was considerate. That was the word that kept occurring to her. Considerate in a way no one had been in years. On the third night, at an inn somewhere in the Midlands, Eliza finally worked up the courage to speak. "Why?" she asked quietly. Benedict looked up from the book he'd been reading, a leather-bound volume of philosophy. He raised an eyebrow in question. "Why did you buy me?" "I'm not." She struggled for words. "I can work, yes, but surely you have servants. What do you want from me?" He reached for his notebook and wrote for several minutes, his handwriting neat and precise despite the speed. When he finished, he turned it toward her. 3 years ago, I was caught in a storm at sea. My ship, I was sailing back from the Mediterranean, capsized. I was pulled from the water by a merchant named Arthur Thorne. He shared his cabin with me, tended my injuries, and likely saved my life. We became friends during that voyage. Eliza's breath caught. "My father?" Benedict nodded and continued writing. "He told me about his family. 6 children. He worried most about his eldest daughter. Said, his wife didn't treat you well, but he was ashamed to admit how badly. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would find you and make sure you were safe." Tears welled in Eliza's eyes, the first she'd shed in months. Her father had worried about her, had tried to protect her, even from across the sea. "Father is dead, isn't he?" she whispered. "That's what you showed my mother." Benedict nodded gravely and wrote, "His ship went down 6 weeks ago. I learned of it only recently. I came as soon as I could. I'm sorry I wasn't faster. And so you bought me, to fulfill a promise to a dead man, to keep my word to a friend. And because what I saw happening to you was unconscionable." Eliza looked down at her hands, at the scars from the willow switch, at the calluses from endless scrubbing. "You could have simply given my mother money, asked her to treat me better." Benedict's expression turned sardonic, and he wrote, "Would that have worked?" "No," Eliza admitted. "It would have made things worse." "Exactly. The only way to protect you was to remove you completely, which required legal authority. So I'm your ward, your property." Benedict paused, then wrote carefully, "Legally, yes. But I have no intention of treating you as such. You'll have freedom within my household. Your own chambers, not a closet. Food, clothing, safety, everything that was denied to you. And in exchange," Eliza asked, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "There was always a price, always something expected. In exchange, you heal. You learn what it means to live without fear. And when you're ready, when you're truly ready, we'll discuss your future." It sounded too good to be true. People didn't simply rescue others out of kindness. There had to be something more, some hidden expectation or demand. But looking into Benedict's steady grey eyes, Eliza found herself wanting to believe, just a little, just enough. On the afternoon of the 4th day, they crested a hill, and Eliza got her first glimpse of Northwood. It was a fortress. There was no other word for it. The main house was built of grey stone, massive and imposing, with towers at each corner like something from a medieval castle. It stood alone on a windswept moor, surrounded by forests of pine and oak. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. "It's so," Eliza began, then stopped. How to describe it? Intimidating? Isolating? Beautiful in a harsh, uncompromising way? Benedict watched her face as they approached, perhaps trying to gauge her reaction. When they pulled up to the main entrance, he helped her from the carriage with careful courtesy, as if she were a lady rather than a purchased ward. The staff assembled to meet them: a housekeeper named Mrs. Thornbury, grey-haired and efficient, a butler named Jameson, who moved with military precision, a handful of maids and footmen. They all treated Eliza with polite deference that felt surreal after years of being treated as less than nothing. "Mrs. Thornbury will show you to your chambers," Benedict wrote, handing the note to the housekeeper. You'll dine at 8. Dress as you are. We're not formal here. Eliza followed Mrs. Thornbury up a grand staircase, trying not to gape at the portraits lining the walls, the thick carpets beneath her feet, the sheer scale of the place. They climbed 2 flights, and then turned down a hallway lined with windows overlooking the moor. Here we are, miss, Mrs. Thornbury said, opening a door. The room beyond took Eliza's breath away. It was larger than the entire servants' quarters at her mother's house. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall, dressed in deep blue velvet. There was a writing desk by the window, a wardrobe that could have held a dozen dresses, a cushioned chair by the fireplace where a fire already burned cheerfully. Thick rugs covered the floor. Actual glass windows with real curtains, and her eyes filled with tears, a door with a lock on the inside. His Grace said you're to have privacy, Mrs. Thornbury explained gently. This room is yours alone. No one enters without your permission, not even His Grace himself. A room with a lock. Privacy. Safety. The wardrobe has been stocked with appropriate clothing, the housekeeper continued. His Grace took the liberty of ordering items in what he estimated your size. If adjustments are needed, we have a seamstress in the village. Dinner is at 8 in the small dining room. I'll have a maid fetch you. Is there anything you need, miss? Eliza shook her head, incapable of speech. Mrs. Thornbury smiled kindly. I'll leave you to rest, then. Welcome to Northwood, Miss Thorne. When the door closed, Eliza stood in the center of the room, slowly turning to take it all in. She walked to the wardrobe and opened it to find dresses in wool and cotton, simple styles, but clean and new and in her size. She ran her hand over them, still half convinced this was a dream from which she'd wake to find herself back in her closet room off the kitchen. She went to the window and looked out over the wild northern landscape. The moors stretched endlessly, dark with heather and bracken. The sky was already beginning to darken. Winter came early this far north. It was harsh and forbidding, and utterly unlike the soft southern countryside she'd known. It was beautiful. Eliza sank onto the edge of the bed, her bed, with its soft mattress and clean sheets, and finally allowed herself to cry. Great, shuddering sobs that she'd been holding back for months. Years, maybe. She cried for her father, who tried to protect her even from the grave. She cried for the girl she'd been before the beatings started, before hope died. She cried for all the years she'd lost, all the dreams that had been beaten out of her with leather and willow. She cried until she had no tears left, until exhaustion claimed her, and she fell asleep, still dressed, curled on top of the covers like a child seeking comfort. She woke to a gentle knock on the door. Through the window, she could see that full darkness had fallen, and the fire had burned low. Miss Thorne, a soft voice called. It's nearly 8. His Grace asked if you'd join him for dinner. Eliza sat up groggily, disoriented. For a moment, she'd forgotten where she was, and panic clawed at her chest until memory returned. Northwood. She was at Northwood. Safe. One moment, please, she called, her voice hoarse from crying. She splashed water from the basin on her face, smoothed her dress as best she could, and tried to tame her hair. In the mirror above the washstand, an actual mirror, not a cracked shard, she barely recognized herself. The same hollow cheeks, the same tired eyes, but something was different. The perpetual tension in her shoulders had eased slightly. The hunted look had faded just a fraction. The maid who'd knocked a girl, perhaps 16, with kind brown eyes, led her through the maze of corridors to a smaller dining room. It was still grander than anything at the Thorne estate, but intimate compared to the cavernous spaces she'd glimpsed on her way in. A fire roared in the hearth. The table was set for 2. Benedict stood when she entered, a courtesy that nearly undid her composure. Men didn't stand for servants. Men didn't stand for purchased wards. He gestured to the seat at his right hand, not at the opposite end of the table, but close, as if they were equals, as if she mattered. Dinner was simple but abundant. Roasted chicken, potatoes with butter, fresh bread, vegetables cooked until tender. A maid served them, and Eliza watched Benedict's plate to understand which utensils to use, terrified of revealing her ignorance. He ate slowly, methodically, and she noticed he kept his movements deliberate, as if to give her time to follow his lead without feeling rushed. When she hesitated over the soup spoon, he simply picked up his own and demonstrated, not patronizing, just helpful. Halfway through the meal, he withdrew his notebook and wrote, "You don't have to be afraid here. There are no tests to pass. No punishments waiting if you make a mistake." Eliza set down her fork carefully. "I don't know how to do this. How to be whatever I'm supposed to be here. You're not supposed to be anything except yourself. Take time. Heal. Learn what you want from life, instead of merely surviving it. And if I don't know what I want, then we'll figure it out together." The simple certainty in those words, the assumption that her wants mattered, that her future was something to be discovered rather than endured, made her chest ache with something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten its name. Hope. She was terrified of it. Hope had betrayed her so many times before. But sitting in this warm room, eating food she hadn't had to scrape from other people's plates, across from a man who'd traveled 4 days just to give her a locked door and call it safety, perhaps, hope was worth the risk. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." Benedict inclined his head, but his eyes held something she couldn't quite read. Determination, perhaps, or the fierce protectiveness of someone who understood, intimately, what it meant to be broken by the people who should have loved you most. That night, Eliza locked her door for the first time in her life. She changed into the nightgown she'd found in the wardrobe, soft cotton that didn't scratch, didn't smell of mildew, didn't have patches upon patches. She climbed into her bed, and pulled the covers up to her chin. And for the first time since she could remember, Eliza Thorne fell asleep without fear. Outside her door, in the corridor, Benedict stood for a long moment, listening to her breathing, even out into sleep. He'd stationed a footman at the end of the hall with instructions to alert him if Miss Thorne needed anything in the night. He'd ordered the fires kept high. He'd ensured the locks were strong and the room was truly secure. But he couldn't protect her from nightmares. Couldn't undo years of trauma with a single day of safety. That would take time. Patience. And Benedict had both in abundance. He returned to his own chambers and pulled out a locked drawer in his desk. Inside was a letter, yellowed with age and seawater, written in Arthur Thorne's hand aboard that ship 3 years ago. "My dear friend Benedict, if you're reading this, I fear the worst has come to pass. I've tried to be a good father, but I've failed my children in ways I'm ashamed to admit. My wife Martha is not well. The gambling has consumed her, and I've been too cowardly to confront it properly. But it's my Eliza who pays the price. She was such a bright child, full of questions and laughter. She loved books and music, and had a tender heart for every injured creature. I should have protected that brightness. Instead, I let Martha's resentment and Julian's entitlement and my own cowardice snuff it out bit by bit. If I don't return, and I have a feeling I won't please find my Eliza, she'll be broken by then, I fear. Lost and hopeless and convinced she deserves nothing better. But she deserves everything, Benedict. She deserves a life where she's cherished instead of beaten, where she's fed instead of starved, where she can remember how to laugh. I know it's too much to ask. You don't even know her, but I'm a desperate man making a desperate plea. Save my daughter from the hell I left her in. Give her the future I failed to provide. Your grateful friend, Arthur." Benedict folded the letter carefully and returned it to the drawer. He'd kept his word. He'd found Eliza. He'd brought her here. But saving her, truly saving her, would take more than a comfortable room and regular meals. It would take teaching her that she was valuable, that she deserved safety and kindness not because she'd earned it, but because she was human, and that was enough. It would take time. But Benedict was patient, and he never, ever broke his promises. The first week at Northwood passed in a strange sort of suspension, as if Eliza had stepped out of time itself. She woke each morning expecting to find herself back in her closet room, expecting her mother's sharp voice demanding she rise and begin her chores. Instead, she woke to sunlight streaming through actual windows, to a fire already lit by an invisible maid, to the extraordinary luxury of time that belonged only to her. At first, she didn't know what to do with freedom. She'd sit in her room, hands folded in her lap, waiting for someone to tell her what task needed doing. When no one came, she'd venture into the hallway, certain she must have missed some instruction, some expectation. But the house ran smoothly. Without her labor, servants moved through their duties with quiet efficiency, and no one demanded anything from her at all. It was unsettling. Mrs. Thornbury found her on the third day, standing uncertainly in the main hallway, as if she'd been abandoned there. "Miss Thorne, are you quite all right?" the housekeeper asked gently. "I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing," Eliza confessed, her voice small. "Surely there's work I should." "His Grace has been very clear, miss. You're a guest in this house, not an employee. Your only duty is to rest and recover." "But I'm not a guest. I'm his ward. He purchased me." Mrs. Thornbury's expression softened with understanding. "His Grace has unconventional views on many subjects, Miss Thorne. He believes that every person deserves dignity and autonomy, regardless of their legal status. You'll find he practices what he believes." "I don't understand him," Eliza said, frustration creeping into her voice. "Why bring me here if he doesn't want anything from me? Perhaps you should ask him yourself. He's in the library, third door on the left, down that corridor. He won't mind the interruption." The library was massive, 3 stories of books lining the walls, with a spiral staircase connecting the levels and tall windows flooding the space with northern light. Benedict sat at a desk near one of those windows, surrounded by correspondence and ledgers. He was dressed more casually than Eliza had yet seen him, no coat. His shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle. He looked up as she entered, and something in his expression shifted, became more alert, more focused. She approached slowly, trying to organize her thoughts into coherent words. He set down his pen and gave her his full attention, and the weight of that attention was almost physical. "I don't understand what I'm doing here," she said without preamble. "I don't understand what you want from me, and it's making me." She struggled for the word, nervous, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Benedict studied her for a long moment, then gestured to the chair across from his desk. When she sat, he began writing in his notebook. "I want nothing from you that you're not freely willing to give. No labor, no servitude, no payment of any kind for your room and board." "Then why am I here at all?" Eliza asked, genuinely confused. "Charity." Benedict's expression turned complicated. He wrote for several minutes. "When I was 8 years old, my father, the late Duke, decided I needed to be made into a proper man. He believed weakness was the enemy of nobility, and any sign of gentleness or sensitivity must be beaten out of his heir. The beatings started small. A cane across the palms for mistakes in my lessons. A belt across my back for showing emotion. But they escalated. By the time I was 12, I was being whipped for imagined infractions, for not sitting straight enough, for looking out a window instead of at my studies, for crying when my mother died. The final beating, the one that damaged my voice beyond repair, happened when I was 15. My father caught me in the stables, comforting a stable boy who'd been dismissed for theft he didn't commit. Father called it consorting with inferior classes and decided to teach me a lesson I wouldn't forget. He used a riding crop, beat me until I couldn't stand, couldn't breathe. Something broke in my throat. The physicians said it was trauma to the vocal cords combined with damage to the surrounding structures. I've never spoken a word since. Eliza's hands had risen to her mouth in horror as she read. "Your father did that to you." Benedict nodded and continued writing. "So you see, I understand what it means to be trapped with someone who should protect you but instead destroys you piece by piece. I understand what it means to have your very voice stolen, to be powerless in your own home. When your father told me about your situation, when I arrived and saw what was happening to you, I saw myself at 15, broken and hopeless and convinced I deserved every blow. You're here because I was once where you are, and because I refuse to let anyone else suffer that way when I have the power to intervene. So this is about redemption? Saving me to somehow save yourself retroactively? Benedict shook his head firmly and wrote, "This is about believing that people deserve safety, that children shouldn't be tortured by their parents, that being born into the wrong family shouldn't be a life sentence of suffering." He paused, then added, "And yes, perhaps it's about the boy I was, wishing someone had saved him, but mostly it's about the woman you are, deserving better than what you received." Eliza felt tears threatening again. She seemed to cry so easily now, as if years of suppressed emotion were finally breaking through. "I don't know how to be saved. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with safety once I have it. Then we'll learn together. I didn't know either, at first. After my father died and I inherited, I spent 2 years just trying to understand what it meant to live without fear. And did you figure it out?" Benedict's smile was slight but genuine. He wrote, "I'm still figuring it out, but I'm better than I was. You will be too. Will you teach me?" The words came out before Eliza could stop them. Not just how to live without fear, but other things. "I can read and do sums, but I never had proper schooling. My mother said education was wasted on me. And I see all these books and I want to understand them, but I don't know where to start." Benedict's expression transformed. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked genuinely pleased, not just satisfied, but happy. He gestured broadly to the library around them and wrote, "All of this is yours to explore. Take any book that interests you. And yes, I'll teach you. I may not be able to speak the lessons, but I can write them. We'll start with whatever you want to learn." "Anything?" Eliza asked, hardly daring to believe it. "Anything. Even things ladies aren't supposed to study. Mathematics and philosophy, and especially those things," Benedict wrote, and there was something fierce in his expression. "The people who told you what you couldn't learn were the same people who beat you to keep you small. Don't let them limit you even now." Eliza stood and moved to the nearest bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines. History, poetry, natural philosophy, agricultural treatises, novels in English and French and Latin. An entire world of knowledge, just waiting for her. "Where do we start?" she asked. Benedict rose and joined her at the shelves. He pulled down a slender volume with a worn leather cover and handed it to her. Mary Wollstonecraft's A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. She looked at the title, then at him questioningly. He wrote, "Start with someone who believed women deserved everything you were denied. Then we'll go from there." That afternoon, Eliza sat in the window seat of the library, wrapped in a shawl against the northern chill, and began to read. Benedict worked at his desk, occasionally glancing up to find her completely absorbed in the text. When she reached a passage that moved her, she'd look up, and he'd notice, and something unspoken would pass between them, a shared understanding that knowledge was power, and power was freedom, and freedom was the most precious gift one person could give another. As the sun set over the moors, painting the room in shades of amber and gold, Eliza realized something that made her chest ache with tentative joy. For the first time in years, she was interested in something beyond mere survival. For the first time, she wanted to learn and grow, and become something more than the broken thing her mother had tried to make her. And the man who'd made this possible sat across the room, asking nothing in return except that she take advantage of the opportunity he'd given her. Perhaps, Eliza thought, turning the page with careful reverence, perhaps being saved looked like this, not a dramatic rescue, but the quiet accumulation of small kindnesses, a locked door, regular meals, books and time, and the radical notion that she deserved to grow instead of merely survive. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't instantaneous, but it was real, and for now, that was enough. Winter descended on Northwood with a fierceness that matched the landscape. Snow piled high against the fortress walls, and the wind howled across the moors like something alive and hunting. But inside, fires burned bright and warm, and Eliza found herself settling into rhythms she'd never imagined possible. She woke when she pleased, usually around 7, early by any reasonable standard but luxuriously late compared to her former life. She breakfasted alone or with Benedict, depending on his schedule. Then she spent her mornings in the library, working through the curriculum he'd designed for her. He was a patient teacher, even without a voice. He'd write out lessons in his neat hand, providing examples and exercises. When she struggled with a concept, he'd find different ways to explain it, never showing frustration, never making her feel stupid for not understanding immediately. They studied mathematics, basic arithmetic, expanding into algebra and geometry. History, not just the dates and battles she'd heard mentioned in passing, but the complex social forces that shaped nations. Natural philosophy, the workings of the physical world, explained through observation and experimentation. Literature, poetry, and prose, learning to analyze not just what was said, but how and why. In the afternoons, she was free to do as she pleased. Sometimes she read for pleasure. Sometimes she walked the ramparts of Northwood with Mrs. Thornbury, learning about the estate's operations. Sometimes she simply sat by her window and watched the snow fall, marveling that she had time for such peaceful idleness. Evenings she spent with Benedict dinner together. Then often music in the drawing room. She'd discovered a pianoforte there. And when she'd hesitantly mentioned that she'd learned to play as a child, Benedict had immediately gestured for her to play. Her skills were rusty, her fingers clumsy from years of scrubbing instead of practicing, but he'd listened with such focused attention that she'd found herself wanting to improve just to see that expression on his face again. She was learning his expressions, his gestures, the slight tightening around his eyes that meant amusement, the way his shoulders relaxed when he was pleased, the almost imperceptible softening of his features when she succeeded at something new. Without words, he was somehow easier to read than anyone she'd ever known, perhaps because he'd learned to communicate everything through body and expression rather than relying on the imprecise medium of speech. And slowly, carefully, Eliza began to heal. The nightmares came less frequently. The flinching when someone moved too quickly gradually faded. The constant tension in her shoulders eased. She gained weight, her face filling out, her collarbones becoming less prominent, the hollows under her eyes smoothed away. She was becoming herself again. Or perhaps becoming herself for the first time. She'd been so young when the abuse started that she couldn't remember who she might have been without it. It was late February, 4 months after her arrival at Northwood, when the letter came. Benedict received it at breakfast, and Eliza watched his expression darken as he read. When he finished, he sat motionless for a long moment, then wrote rapidly, "News from the South. About your family." Eliza's stomach tightened. "What kind of news?" "Bad. The estate is being foreclosed. Your mother's creditors have lost patience, but the money you gave her, £4,000, should have been more than enough." Benedict's expression turned grim as he wrote, "Your mother is a compulsive gambler. The money I gave her lasted approximately 6 weeks. She used it to place massive bets, convinced her luck was about to turn. It didn't. She's now deeper in debt than before." Eliza should have felt something. Sympathy, perhaps, or vindication, or even sorrow. Instead, she felt only a distant numbness. What will happen to them? The estate will be auctioned to satisfy debts. Your siblings will likely need to find employment. Julian is apparently attempting to marry the wool merchant's daughter, Eleanor Ashford, but her father refuses to approve the match while the Thorn name is associated with such scandal. And my mother? Debtor's prison is a possibility. Several of her creditors are pushing for it. Eliza set down her teacup with shaking hands. Martha had been cruel, sadistic even. But debtor's prison was a horrible fate. Dark, disease-ridden places where people rotted for years, forgotten by the world. "I should feel glad," she said quietly. "Shouldn't I? After everything she did to me, I should want her to suffer." Benedict reached across the table and covered her hand with his, the first time he'd voluntarily touched her beyond the formal courtesies of helping her from carriages or offering his arm. His hand was large and warm, completely engulfing hers, and the gesture was so gentle it made her eyes sting. He wrote with his free hand, "The fact that you don't want revenge proves you're nothing like her. You've kept your humanity despite her best efforts to destroy it." "What should I do?" Eliza asked. Should I try to help? Do you want to? I don't know. Part of me wants to let her face the consequences of her own actions. But part of me remembers I have 4 sisters who never did anything to me directly. They stood by and watched. Yes, but they were children too. Matilda is only 12. It's not her fault. Benedict nodded thoughtfully and wrote, "Then perhaps the question isn't whether to help, but how, and whom specifically you want to help. Could we? Is it possible to help my sisters without helping my mother? I'll make inquiries. But Eliza, there's something else you should know." He hesitated, which was unusual. Benedict was normally decisive, certain. This hesitation made her nervous. "The foreclosure proceedings are being handled by a trust I established. Anonymously, but legally. I am the mystery creditor who bought up all your family's debts." Eliza pulled her hand back, confusion and something like betrayal flashing through her. "You did this? You're the one forcing them into ruin?" "I didn't force anything," Benedict wrote quickly. "Your mother chose to gamble. The creditors chose to sell me her debts. They wanted guaranteed payment, which I provided. I simply consolidated the consequences." "But why? Why would you do this?" He wrote for several minutes, his expression serious. "Your father made me promise to protect not just you, but all his children if something happened to him. When I saw the situation, saw Julian being groomed to be as useless and cruel as his mother, saw your sisters being raised to value appearance over character, saw the entire family heading toward disaster, I realized that the kindest thing might be to let that disaster happen in a controlled way. If I hadn't intervened, Julian would have eventually destroyed what remained of the estate anyway. Your sisters would have made terrible marriages, or worse. The collapse was inevitable. By controlling when and how it happened, I can control what comes after." "And what comes after?" Eliza asked, her voice hard. "What's your plan for my family?" Benedict met her eyes steadily as he wrote, "That depends on what you want to happen. Legally, as the creditor, I have significant power over the estate and its inhabitants. But morally, the choice belongs to you. They're your family. You decide what mercy, if any, they deserve." Eliza stood and walked to the window, looking out over the snow-covered moors. Her family, the people who'd watched her beaten and starved and broken, the people who'd treated her as less than human for years. But also, Constance, who'd sometimes slipped her extra bread when Martha wasn't looking. Louisa, who'd once apologized quietly for spilling water on her, even though Martha had ordered her to do it. Little Matilda, who'd never participated in the cruelties, just watched with confused, sad eyes. And Julian, who'd been raised to be his mother's creature but might possibly have some spark of decency buried beneath years of toxic nurture. "I need time to think," she said finally. Benedict nodded. "Take all the time you need. The foreclosure won't proceed immediately. We have months before any final decisions must be made." But Eliza knew that time wouldn't make the decision easier. How did you balance justice and mercy? Vengeance and forgiveness? How did you protect yourself while not becoming as cruel as those who'd hurt you? She didn't know. But perhaps that uncertainty, that refusal to choose easy answers, was itself a kind of wisdom. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay in her comfortable bed, watching moonlight paint silver patterns on her ceiling, and thought about her family huddled in their decaying estate, facing ruin. She thought about her mother, who'd sold her daughter without hesitation but would now face the consequences of that choice. She thought about her father, who'd tried to protect her but failed, and who'd trusted Benedict to succeed where he couldn't. And she thought about Benedict himself, this strange, silent man who'd kept a promise to a dead friend, who'd rescued her and asked nothing in return, who'd taught her and fed her and given her a room with a lock on the door. What did she owe him? What did she owe her family? What did she owe herself? She was still pondering these questions when dawn broke over the frozen moors, painting the world in shades of pink and gold. And she realized that perhaps the question wasn't what she owed anyone. Perhaps the question was what kind of person she wanted to become. Did she want to be someone who took vengeance when given the chance? Or someone who chose a harder, more complicated path? She didn't have the answer yet, but she was beginning to understand that having the choice itself, Having the power to decide rather than simply endure was its own kind of freedom. And freedom, she was learning, was far more complex than she'd ever imagined. Spring came late to the north that year, but when it finally arrived, it transformed the moors from barren wasteland to rolling carpets of purple heather and golden gorse. Eliza had spent the winter months in contemplation, working through her complicated feelings about her family's impending ruin. Benedict had been patient, never pressing her for a decision, but keeping her informed of developments. The foreclosure proceedings had been delayed multiple times his doing, she knew, buying her time to choose. But time was running out. By summer's end, a final decision would have to be made. It was mid-May when Eliza finally knew what she wanted to do. She found Benedict in his study, reviewing estate accounts. He looked up as she entered, and something in her expression must have told him she'd reached a decision because he immediately set down his pen and gave her his full attention. "I want to go back," she said without preamble. "I want to see them, face them, and then I want to decide what happens next, not from a distance, but with full knowledge of who they've become." Benedict studied her for a long moment, then wrote, "Are you certain? Seeing them again might be difficult, might undo some of the healing you've achieved here. I know, but I need to do this. I need to see if there's anything worth saving, or if I should let justice run its course. When do you want to leave? Tomorrow, before I lose my nerve." Benedict nodded and wrote, "Then we leave at dawn. But Eliza, I'm coming with you. You don't face them alone." She felt a rush of gratitude so intense it nearly brought tears. "Thank you." That night, Eliza could barely sleep. She kept imagining the moment she'd walk through the doors of her childhood home, not as the broken, starving girl who'd left, but as something new, something stronger. Mrs. Thornbury helped her dress the next morning, and Eliza was startled by her own reflection. The woman in the mirror wore a gown of deep sapphire blue, expertly tailored to her now healthy figure. Her hair, glossy from proper nutrition and care, was arranged in an elegant style. Her face had filled out, the hollow-cheeked desperation replaced by quiet dignity. She looked like a lady. She looked like someone who mattered. "You're beautiful, miss," Mrs. Thornbury said softly. "Don't let anyone make you forget it." The journey south took 3 days. They traveled more slowly this time, stopping at comfortable inns, and Eliza found herself dreading and anticipating the arrival in equal measure. On the afternoon of the third day, the Thorn estate came into view. It had deteriorated significantly since she'd left. The gardens were completely overgrown now, the fountain filled with brackish water and dead leaves. Several windows on the upper floors were broken, covered with boards. The whole place had an air of abandonment, of slow decay finally reaching its inevitable conclusion. Benedict's carriage pulled up to the front entrance, a statement in itself. Eliza was not arriving at the servants' door this time. She stepped down, Benedict beside her, and approached the door. It opened before she could knock, revealing old Jameson, the butler who'd served the family for 40 years. His eyes widened in shock. "Miss Eliza," he breathed. "Is that truly you?" "It is, Jameson. Is my mother at home?" "In the drawing room, miss. With your siblings." "Shall I?" "No need to announce us. We'll show ourselves in." Eliza walked through the entrance hall with her head high, Benedict a silent, powerful presence at her side. The house smelled of mildew and neglect. Portraits hung crooked on the walls. The marble floors were dull with grime. She could hear voices from the drawing room, her mother's sharp tones, Julian's sullen responses, her sister's quiet murmurs. She paused at the doorway, gathering her courage, then stepped inside. The room fell silent. They were all there, gathered around a tea service that was obviously the last of the good china. Her mother sat in the largest chair, still wearing jewelry she should have sold months ago. Julian sprawled in another seat, looking dissipated and older than his 22 years. Her 4 sisters occupied the sofa, their dresses noticeably shabby. For a long moment, no one spoke. They simply stared at Eliza, as if she were a ghost. It was Matilda who broke the silence. "Eliza?" The youngest girl's voice was uncertain, hopeful. "Is it really you?" "Hello, Matilda," Eliza said gently. You've grown. What are you doing here? Martha's voice cut through the tentative reunion like a blade. Come to gloat over our misfortune. No, Mother. I came to see what's become of you all, and to deliver some news. Benedict stepped forward and placed a leather portfolio on the tea table. Even in the diminished circumstances, Martha's eyes were drawn to the ducal seal embossed on the leather. Who is this? She demanded. The Duke of Northwood, Eliza said calmly. My guardian, and the man who holds all your debts. The color drained from Martha's face. You're the mystery creditor. His Grace is, Eliza corrected, at my father's request. You see, Mother, Father knew what you were doing to this family, and he made arrangements to protect us all from you. That's a lie. Arthur never. Father saved His Grace's life at sea 3 years ago, Eliza continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. He told the Duke everything about your gambling, your cruelty, your systematic destruction of this family. He made the Duke promise to intervene if anything happened to him. Benedict opened the portfolio and withdrew a stack of papers, laying them out methodically. Debts, mortgages, the deed to the estate itself. Everything you own, Mother, belongs to His Grace now. This house, the land, even the furniture you're sitting on. All of it was purchased legally when you defaulted on your obligations. Martha's face had gone from pale to flushed with rage. You ungrateful creature. After everything I did for you, everything you did to me, Eliza corrected, her voice hardening. Let's be accurate, Mother. You beat me, starved me, sold me. You destroyed every opportunity I might have had for escape. And when a good man wanted to marry me, you told him I was feeble-minded rather than see me happy. You deserved everything, Martha started, but Julian interrupted. Mother, stop. He'd stood, his face stricken. Just stop. Everyone turned to stare at him. She's right, Julian continued, his voice rough. Everything she said is true. We all saw it. We all let it happen. And we have no right at all to stand here and pretend we're the injured parties. Julian, Martha hissed. Sit down and be quiet. No. He moved closer to Eliza, and she instinctively stepped back, but he stopped, holding up his hands. I'm sorry, Eliza. I'm so desperately sorry. I was a coward. I watched Mother beat you and I did nothing. I ate the food you should have had and told myself it wasn't my responsibility. I was cruel and useless, and everything a brother shouldn't be. Tears were streaming down his face now. I can't take it back. I can never make it right. But I want you to know, I know what I am. What we all are, and if you've come here for vengeance, we deserve every bit of it. Constance had started crying quietly. Arabella stared at the floor. Louisa looked at Eliza with something like desperate hope. Little Matilda simply looked confused and sad. Only Martha remained defiant. You're all being theatrical. Eliza was always difficult. Always. Mother, shut up. Constance's voice was sharp. For once in your life, just shut up and face what you've done. The shock of her eldest daughter's rebellion left Martha momentarily speechless. Eliza looked at her family, really looked at them. Her mother, still venomous and unrepentant, even facing total ruin. Her brother, finally showing some spark of conscience, but years too late. Her sisters, products of their upbringing, but not entirely without feeling. She thought about the months she'd spent at Northwood, learning what it meant to live without fear, learning that she had value beyond her ability to serve or endure, learning that mercy and justice weren't opposites but partners in a complicated dance, and she made her choice. Mother, she said quietly, you will face the consequences of your gambling. The debts you incurred through your own choices will be satisfied through the sale of this estate. You will not go to debtor's prison. I won't be that cruel. But you will also not receive any support from me or His Grace. You'll need to find employment, or depend on the charity of those friends you haven't already alienated. I imagine that will be punishment enough. Martha's face twisted with fury and humiliation. But she said nothing. "Julian," Eliza continued. "You wanted to marry Miss Ashford, correct?" He nodded miserably. "Her father won't consent while our name is attached to scandal. His Grace has connections to the Ashford family. He's willing to arrange a meeting where you can prove yourself worthy, but only if you actually put in the effort. You'll need to find legitimate employment. Prove you can support a wife through honest work rather than your mother's schemes. Can you do that?" "Yes," Julian said immediately. "Yes, I swear it. We'll see. Words are easy. Action is what matters." She turned to her sisters. "You four will come with me to Northwood. Not permanently, just for a season. Long enough to receive proper education and training so you can make real choices about your futures. You'll work for your keep, nothing brutal, but enough to understand that privilege is earned, not inherited. If you prove yourselves, His Grace will provide modest dowries so you can make decent matches." "Eliza, you can't," Arabella started. "I can. His Grace has given me authority to make these decisions. But understand, this is your one chance. If you squander it, if you treat the servants at Northwood the way you watched me being treated, you'll be sent back here with nothing. Am I clear?" 4 heads nodded in unison. Even Matilda's. "Good. Pack your essentials. We leave in the morning." Benedict, who'd been a silent presence throughout, now stepped forward. He placed a single document on the table, in front of Martha, the deed to the estate. Martha snatched it up, hope flaring in her eyes, but it died as she read. The estate had been sold, yes, but not to Benedict. It had been purchased by a trust established in Arthur Thorne's name, to be held for his legitimate heirs, specifically excluding Martha herself. "You're taking everything," Martha whispered, the reality finally penetrating. "No, Mother," Eliza said softly. "You took everything. From me, from Father, from your own children. We're simply taking back what you destroyed." She turned toward the door, Benedict following, but paused at the threshold. "One more thing," she said without looking back. "His Grace has been investigating Father's death, the shipwreck that killed him. It seems there are some irregularities in the official reports. Debts taken out in his name that he never authorized. Forgeries. His Grace's solicitors are looking into it." She finally turned to face her mother directly. "If it turns out you had anything to do with Father's death, if you forged those documents, if you sabotaged his business, there will be consequences beyond financial ruin. Do you understand?" Martha's face had gone ashen. "I would never." "I didn't." "We'll see," Eliza said. "Truth has a way of surfacing eventually." She left then, walking out of the house that had been her prison, leaving her mother to face the wreckage of her own making. Outside, in the fading afternoon light, Benedict offered his arm, and she took it gratefully. "Did I do the right thing?" she asked quietly as they walked toward the carriage. Benedict withdrew his notebook. "You offered mercy where none was required, justice where it was deserved, and opportunity where it might be accepted. That's more than right. That's wise. I almost wanted to be crueler, to make them suffer the way they made me suffer. The fact that you didn't, that you chose a harder, kinder path, proves you're nothing like them. You broke the cycle." Eliza looked back at the estate one last time. Tomorrow, her sisters would join her at Northwood. Julian would begin his difficult journey toward becoming someone better, and Martha would face the world alone, without wealth, or family, or the armor of social status to hide behind. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was human justice, messy and complicated and tinged with mercy. And perhaps, Eliza thought as Benedict helped her into the carriage, perhaps that was the only kind worth having. They stayed the night at a coaching inn 10 miles from the estate. Eliza couldn't bear to sleep under her mother's roof, even though technically it wasn't her mother's roof anymore. She just finished preparing for bed when she heard a commotion downstairs, raised voices, the sound of someone demanding entry. Her heart seized with sudden fear. Had her mother followed them? Was there some new threat? She grabbed her dressing gown and hurried into the hallway, nearly colliding with Benedict, who'd emerged from his own room already dressed, moving with the controlled urgency of someone expecting danger. They descended the stairs together to find the innkeeper, apologetically blocking a man wrapped in a travel cloak, dripping with rain from the storm that had blown in. "I'm sorry, sir, but we're quite full. There's another inn 5 miles. I'm not looking for a room." The man interrupted, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and something else, desperation. "I'm looking for the Duke of Northwood. I was told he might be staying here." Benedict stepped forward into the light, and the man's eyes widened with recognition and something like relief. "Your Grace, thank God. I've been searching for you for 3 days. There's been a development." He noticed Eliza then and hesitated. "Perhaps we should speak privately?" Benedict gestured to a private parlor off the main room, but Eliza followed. Whatever this was, it involved her, she could feel it. The man was perhaps 50, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent years at sea. He carried a leather satchel that he clutched like it contained something precious. Once the door closed, he spoke rapidly. "Your Grace, I'm Captain Morrison. I was first mate on the Seahawk, the ship that was supposed to have sunk with Arthur Thorne aboard." Eliza's breath caught. Benedict went very still. "The thing is, Your Grace, it didn't sink. That's what we were told to report, but it's a lie. The ship was sabotaged, deliberately run aground near the Spanish coast. Most of the crew was paid off to keep quiet. But Mr. Thorne," he swallowed hard, "Mr. Thorne survived the wreck." "What?" Eliza's voice came out as barely a whisper. "My father is alive." "Was alive, miss. 6 months ago. I don't know if he still is. He was badly injured in the wreck and taken to a Spanish prison, debtor's prison. Someone had forged documents in his name, taking out massive loans against his business. When he couldn't pay, the Spanish authorities arrested him." Benedict was already writing furiously. Who arranged the forgery? Who sabotaged the ship? Morrison looked pained. "I don't know for certain, Your Grace, but the loan documents I've seen," he opened his satchel and withdrew papers, "were signed by Lady Martha Thorne. She took out loans in her husband's name without his knowledge, used his business as collateral. When he found out and threatened to expose her, he trailed off, unable to finish. She tried to kill him." Eliza finished, her voice hollow. "She sabotaged his ship to collect on his life insurance and cover her debts. That's my belief, miss. And it gets worse. The Spanish prison where they're holding him, it's brutal. Disease, starvation, beatings. Prisoners rarely last more than a year." Eliza swayed, and Benedict caught her elbow, steadying her. Her father, her kind, absent, inadequate but loving father, was alive and suffering in some foreign hell because of her mother's greed. "How long has he been there?" she asked. 9 months, miss. Maybe longer. I only learned about it 2 months ago, and I've been trying to find someone with the resources and authority to help him ever since." Benedict was writing rapidly. "Why come to me?" "Because I've made inquiries, Your Grace. You have contacts in Spain. Influence. And you were Arthur Thorne's friend. I'm hoping you'll use that influence to get him released before it's too late." Benedict looked at Eliza, a question in his eyes. She understood what he was asking. "Your father wasn't always there for you. He left you in danger. Do you want to save him?" But there was no question in Eliza's mind. "We get him out. Whatever it takes, we get him out." Benedict nodded and wrote, "I'll send word to my contacts tonight. We'll need official documentation, bribes most likely, and fast transport. Captain Morrison, you'll accompany us? To the ends of the earth, Your Grace, if it helps Arthur Thorne." The next hours were a flurry of activity. Benedict wrote letters, dispatched riders, called in favors from contacts across Europe. Money was transferred. Documents were forged, the legal kind of forgery, the kind that greased diplomatic wheels. By dawn, they had a plan. Benedict would travel to Spain with Captain Morrison and sufficient funds to bribe or buy Arthur Thorne's freedom. It would take weeks, possibly months. "I'm coming with you," Eliza said. Benedict shook his head firmly and wrote, "Too dangerous. Spanish prisons are no place for women? For delicate ladies?" Eliza's voice hardened. "I've survived worse than you can imagine. My father is suffering because of my mother's cruelty. I will not sit comfortably in England while you rescue him. I'm coming." They locked eyes, wills clashing. Benedict's expression was stern, protective, but Eliza didn't waver. Finally, he wrote, You're not the fragile girl I rescued anymore, are you? No, Eliza said firmly. I'm not. And that's because you taught me I didn't have to be. A smile ghosted across Benedict's face, and he wrote, Then pack quickly. We leave within the hour. The journey to Spain was arduous, rough seas, longer overland travel, and the constant anxiety of wondering if they'd arrive in time. But finally, 6 weeks after leaving England, they stood outside a fortress-like prison in a small Spanish coastal town. The place reeked of human misery. Even from outside the walls, Eliza could hear the sounds, groans of pain, the rattle of chains, the harsh voices of guards. Benedict's contacts had arranged everything. The paperwork showing Arthur Thorne's debts had been satisfied through ducal intervention. The guards had been properly motivated with Spanish gold. They would be allowed to enter and retrieve the prisoner. But when they were finally led into the dark, disease-ridden depths of the prison, to the cell where Arthur Thorne was kept, Eliza almost didn't recognize her father. He was emaciated, skeletal. His once robust frame had wasted to nothing. His beard was long and matted, his skin covered in sores and bruises. He lay on filthy straw, barely conscious, clearly near death. Papa, Eliza breathed, dropping to her knees beside him. Arthur's eyes opened slowly, struggling to focus. When they finally settled on her face, confusion flickered across his features. Eliza? His voice was a broken rasp. No, can't be. You're a vision. A dying dream. I'm real, Papa. I'm here. We've come to take you home. Can't be real. My Eliza is. She's in England. In danger. I failed her. Failed all of them. Tears leaked from the corners of his eyes. I'm sorry. So sorry. Hush, Papa. Don't speak. Save your strength. She looked up at Benedict, who was already coordinating with the guards, arranging for a litter to carry Arthur out. It took hours to extract him from the prison and transport him to the inn where they'd taken rooms. A Spanish physician was summoned. One of Benedict's contacts had recommended him as both skilled and discreet. The doctor's assessment was grim. Severe malnutrition, multiple infections, possible damage to internal organs from beatings. Arthur Thorne was dying. The best they could hope for was to make him comfortable, and perhaps if he was very strong and very lucky, stabilize him enough to survive the journey back to England. For 3 days, Arthur hovered between life and death. Eliza barely left his side, spooning broth into him when he could swallow, bathing his fevered skin, holding his hand while he shook with chills. On the 4th day, the fever finally broke. Arthur woke lucid for the first time, his eyes focusing clearly on Eliza's face. You are real, he whispered. My beautiful girl, how did you find me? Benedict did. The Duke of Northwood, the man you saved at sea. He kept his promise, Papa. He kept all his promises. Arthur's eyes found Benedict, who stood near the window. You found my Eliza? Benedict nodded. Protected her. Another nod. From Martha. This time, Benedict wrote, From everything. She's safe. She's strong. And she insisted on coming to rescue you. Arthur's eyes filled with tears. I failed you all so badly. I knew Martha was cruel, but I was too cowardly to confront it properly. I kept leaving, kept telling myself it would be better when I returned. But it never was it? No, Eliza said honestly. It got worse every time you left. I'm sorry. I'm so desperately sorry. I know, Papa. And I've forgiven you. You were weak, but you weren't evil. And you tried, in your way, to protect us. The estate is being managed by a trust in your name. Mother can't touch it. My sisters are safe. Julian is learning to be better than he was. Everything is being taken care of. Bored, and Martha. Arthur's face hardened. She tried to kill me, didn't she? The accident that wrecked my ship. We believe so. His Grace's solicitors are gathering evidence. Arthur was quiet for a long moment, then said, Don't prosecute her. Papa, no. Listen. If you prosecute, it becomes public. The scandal will destroy your sister's prospects, ruin Julian's chance at redemption. Martha will suffer enough, losing everything she values: money, status, power. Let that be punishment enough." Eliza looked at Benedict, who wrote, "He's right, and mercy, even undeserved mercy, is sometimes the wiser choice." "Fine," Eliza agreed reluctantly. "But she never sees you again, never comes near our family. Agreed?" "Agreed," Arthur whispered. It took another month before Arthur was strong enough to travel. They returned to England slowly, stopping frequently to let him rest. By the time Northwood came into view, he was walking on his own again, though still weak. The reunion with his other children was emotional and complicated. The girls wept and embraced him. Julian confessed everything and begged forgiveness. Arthur granted it, though he made clear that forgiveness didn't mean there wouldn't be consequences. Julian would work to earn back his father's trust. And through it all, Benedict watched over them, silent, protective, ensuring they had everything they needed to heal as a family. It was late summer, nearly a year after Eliza had first arrived at Northwood, when Benedict asked her to join him in the library. She found him standing by the window, looking out over the moors. He'd been quiet lately, more so than usual, and she'd sensed something weighing on him. "Is everything all right?" she asked. He turned and handed her his notebook. What he'd written was longer than usual. "Eliza, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you months ago, but I was too much of a coward. When your father saved my life at sea, we talked for weeks during that voyage. He told me everything about his family, his weak character, his strong wife who'd become something cruel, his 6 children. But he didn't just talk about all of you equally. He talked about you, Eliza, with special tenderness. Told me you were bright and kind and deserved so much better than what life had given you. I became fascinated by you before we ever met. A girl I'd never seen but felt I knew through your father's stories. When Arthur made me promise to protect his children if something happened to him, I agreed readily, but it was you I was most eager to help. When I finally found you and saw what was being done to you, I told myself I was being purely altruistic, fulfilling a promise to a friend, righting an injustice. But the truth is more complicated. From the moment I saw you in that market, something shifted in me, and as you've healed, as I've watched you grow stronger and brighter and more yourself, I've fallen in love with you." Eliza's hands trembled as she read. "I know I have no right. You came here traumatized and dependent, and I held all the power. Anything between us would be complicated by that imbalance, which is why I've said nothing, why I've maintained proper distance, why I've treated you as a ward and student rather than what I wish you could be. But your father is recovered now. Your sisters are settled in their own situations, Constance engaged to a decent young man, Arabella and Louisa training as governesses, Matilda happy in school. Julian is working honestly for the first time in his life. You've fulfilled your obligations to your family, which means you're free, Eliza. Truly free, for the first time in your life. Free to make your own choices about your future." She looked up from the notebook to find Benedict watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He wrote quickly, "I'm not asking anything of you. I just needed you to know the truth before you decide what comes next. You can stay here as long as you like, with no expectations. Or you can leave, and I'll provide you with funds and connections to build any life you choose. Whatever you want, I'll support it. But if, and only if, you feel even a fraction of what I feel, I want you to know that I would be honored beyond measure if you'd consider staying not as my ward, but as my wife." Eliza set down the notebook carefully. Her mind was reeling. She thought about the year she'd spent at Northwood, the way Benedict had taught her without condescension, the way he'd pushed her to grow but never forced, the way his eyes lit up when she succeeded at something new, the way his presence made her feel safe in a way nothing else ever had. She thought about how she looked forward to their dinners together, their evenings of music, their walks around the estate, how she'd started choosing dresses based on which colors made him look at her just a bit longer, how her heart had begun racing when he smiled his rare, genuine smiles. She'd been so focused on healing, on becoming herself, that she hadn't let herself examine these feelings. But now, forced to confront them. "You love me," she said aloud, testing the words. Benedict nodded, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "And you want to marry me? Not because you pity me, or because you promised my father, but because you actually love me." Another nod. "That's—" She struggled for words. "That's terrifying." Benedict's face fell slightly, but he wrote, "I understand. After everything you've been through, trust is—" "No," Eliza interrupted. "It's terrifying because I love you too." Benedict froze. "I've loved you for months," she continued, the words spilling out now. "But I told myself it was gratitude, or dependence, or some kind of trauma response. I told myself you could never see me as anything but the broken girl you rescued. I told myself I was being foolish." She moved closer to him, close enough to see the silver flecks in his grey eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "But it's not gratitude. It's not dependence. You've given me freedom and education, and the tools to build my own life. If I choose you, it won't be because I need you to survive. It'll be because I want you in my life. Because you make me happy. Because you really see me in a way no one else ever has." Benedict's hands rose slowly, hesitantly, to cup her face. His eyes asked a question. "Yes," Eliza whispered. "Yes to all of it. Yes to staying. Yes to marrying you. Yes to building a life together." And then Benedict smiled, not his usual slight upturn of lips, but a full, genuine, radiant smile that transformed his entire face. He pulled her into his arms, holding her with exquisite gentleness, as if she were something infinitely precious. They stood like that for a long moment, wrapped in each other, and Eliza realized something that made her want to laugh and cry at once. She'd spent her whole life being told she was worthless, being beaten down, starved, sold. She'd believed she would never deserve love or happiness, or anything beyond mere survival. But here, in the arms of a man who'd crossed countries to keep a promise, who'd seen her at her worst and chosen to help her become her best, who'd loved her even before he'd met her here, she finally understood her own worth. She wasn't broken beyond repair. She wasn't damaged goods. She wasn't less than anyone else. She was Eliza Thorne. And she was loved. And she was free. And that, she thought as Benedict pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, was the only ending her story had ever needed. Before we reveal the final moments of Eliza and Benedict's new life, I want to thank you for staying with us. If this story moved you, please share it with one friend. Word of mouth is how we grow. And remember, subscribe if you haven't yet. We see every single one of you who joins our community. Thank you. 6 months later, Eliza Sterling, Duchess of Northwood, stood in the great hall of the fortress that had become her home, surrounded by the people who'd become her family. Her father, Arthur, healthy again though bearing the permanent marks of his ordeal, walked her down an aisle strewn with heather from the moors. Her sisters served as attendants, dressed in simple but elegant gowns. Julian stood among Benedict's groomsmen, sober and serious, working every day to become the man his father had hoped he'd be. And at the end of that aisle stood Benedict, her silent duke, her unexpected savior, her truest love. When she reached him, he took her hand with the gentle reverence that had characterized every interaction between them, and his eyes spoke volumes his voice never could. They married in the old chapel on the estate, with vows spoken and written, with promises made not from desperation or duty but from genuine choice and love. The servants threw rice as they emerged into the summer sunlight. The tenants cheered, and Eliza realized that all of this, was real, was hers, was the life she'd never dared dream of. That evening, at the wedding feast, Arthur rose to make a toast. "My daughter," he said, his voice still rough but strong, was beaten and broken by the very person who should have loved her most. She survived cruelties that would have destroyed lesser souls. And yet she stands before us today not defined by what was done to her, but by what she chose to become despite it. He raised his glass. To Eliza and Benedict, two people who understand that true strength isn't the absence of scars, but the courage to heal. May your life together be filled with all the joy that was denied you before. To Eliza and Benedict, the gathered crowd chorused. Later, when the celebration had ended and the guests had departed, Eliza and Benedict stood on the ramparts of Northwood, looking out over the darkening moors. She leaned against him, his arms secure around her waist, and thought about how far she'd come. From the girl who knelt in ashes to the woman who wore a duchess's coronet. From the daughter who was sold to the wife who was cherished. From the victim who'd lost her voice to the woman who'd found it again, stronger than before. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for seeing me when I was invisible, for believing I was worth saving when I'd stopped believing it myself." Benedict pulled out the small notebook he always carried and wrote simply, "Thank you for choosing me, for trusting me, for loving me, despite all the reasons you had not to." She turned in his arms and kissed him, this man who'd given her everything without asking anything in return, and thought, this is what redemption looks like. Not a dramatic rescue, but the slow, patient work of healing. Not a grand gesture, but 1,000 small kindnesses accumulated over time. This is what love looks like. Not perfect or easy, but real and earned, and infinitely precious because of everything they'd both survived to find it. In the end, Eliza Sterling learned that the marks on her back were not signs of her shame, but maps of her survival. With Benedict by her side, she rebuilt her father's legacy and turned a house of pain into a home of peace. She learned that broken things could be mended, that silenced voices could find new ways to speak, and that the girl who'd once believed she deserved nothing had actually deserved everything all along. The northern wind whispered across the moors, carrying the scent of heather and hope, and Eliza smiled. She was home. She was safe. She was loved, and that's all that matters. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. If this story touched you, please leave a comment below. Tell us what you thought. Tell us what you felt. And most importantly, if you have not subscribed yet, please do so now. We have so many more stories to share with you. Stories of love, of courage, of second chances. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Until next time, thank you for watching. We will see you in the next story. Bye.